And welcome to Full Press Coverage Fantasy Sunday, live here on the Full Press Coverage Network, Full Press Coverage Radio, on the Full Press Coverage YouTube channel. Welcome everyone. And this will be something that most weeks I'll be on here helping out with whatever I can fantasy-wise, whether that's sit-start questions. I'll be updating injury reports as well. So for all those interested, feel free to send your own questions, whether that's, again, sit-start questions, trade questions, just player analysis in general. Feel free. So, appreciate any and all input, any and all viewership, and any and all questions. So we'll get started on that. And as if questions do come in, I'll get to those as they arrive. For now, I guess just a quick welcome, everyone. It's week 1 of the NFL season. We're happy to finally be here. I think it's a great time of year. Obviously, everyone here, who's watching, assuming you enjoy football, and I think it'll be a good week this week. We already had a great start to the week. Actually, the Bucks Cowboys game was incredible. Hoping that this Sunday it's a lot of the same, the same sentiments, hopefully, and we'll see as we get to that. A lot of hoping for getting close games, high scoring games. We love that for fantasy, where we want as many touchdowns as possible for our players. And I guess touchdowns is where I'll start, and kind of the touchdown upside, because there have been some questions asked already. Either to to do that, you can either reach the Full Press Coverage fantasy pod account at FPC_fantasy pod. You also have my personal account at Senra Says. So sending questions to there, either one, I'll get to those and answer those. But looking at the fantasy account in particular, there was a question someone asked. I will get to it. I want to make sure I'm reading it entirely correctly in terms of all the settings. You have to go back a little bit. Hang on. Sorry. I know the crux of it is it's Melvin Gordon versus Kyle Pitts. I just want to specify if it was half point or full point, just to get all those details. Actually, they didn't specify. So, asking for their flex spot, Kyle Pitts or Melvin Gordon, week 1. Now, generally, I think in terms of I'll get to roster build after. I think just for the strict week 1 start, I kind of like Melvin Gordon this week. The Giants defense, it's a good defense, and they've got some good run stuffers, but it's also not necessarily elite. I don't know how this game is going to go. It might be a really run-heavy defensive battle for both, and I could see that the Broncos, relying on Melvin Gordon more heavily this week. So I think if there was any other week to start him, it would be a game like this where they're favored. They are favored, right? Yeah. Their last lines I checked, they were 3-point favorites against the Giants, so 3-point road favorites too. And generally, the NFL or at least the Vegas lines, the kind of rule of thumb hidden line is 3 points for a home team. So they're saying if this was neutral territory, they'd almost give the Broncos 6 points. That enough of a spread telling me, okay, Broncos better team, better to have the running back. So I think Melvin Gordon's going to get a lot of work and has touchdown upside. The Falcons are also favored, but then you want that less for the pass catchers, right? You want you want that for like a player like Mike Davis, for instance. The Falcons are favored; it's a good game script for him. Less for the pass catchers. Now, Kyle Pitts in his first game, is the rookie tight end going to be as amazing as everyone expects him to? I mean, that is a possibility, and it might happen. But I mean, there also could be, this might be a tough game for him. Like, as much as most people think he's going to do incredibly and there's nothing that's going to stop him, I do wonder, game 1 of the NFL, if it's not going to come to him immediately. So I would prefer Melvin Gordon. I think between the two, I'd say he has the better chance at scoring a touchdown. I think that he's still probably going to get the goal line duties. Maybe Javonte Williams takes it from him week 1, and then I'm completely wrong. But I'm going to go with Gordon for now. Now, I know my co-host on the Full Press Fantasy Pod, Brad Harvard, he actually prefers Pitts, the upside, taking the upside shot right off the bat. right off week one. So I guess if you listen to my co-host, you'll go with Pitts, but I'm still saying Melvin Gordon for this week. Again, maybe Javonte Williams changes that, and by week 2, I'm no longer in on Gordon. But yeah, I'm gonna say Gordon for now for week 1. And one of the things I did want to touch on with this is the choice to build your roster with Pitts as a flex option. So they asked Pitts as a flex, so I'm assuming they've got an elite tight end. I guess maybe I should have asked them that. If you don't really have a good tight end, just play Pitts as your starting tight end and forget it. But assuming they've got a Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Darren Waller, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, a tight end you feel pretty comfortable leaving in kind of, we'll say, every week. I mean, I guess Mark Andrews is tough because so touchdown dependent. Every week he may not score the best, but he's someone that I still want to put in my lineups every week. I don't think that I don't really want to bench him and have him go off. That's awful. I think kind of start your studs. So assuming one of those 5 tight ends are in that starting tight end spot, it makes sense flexing Pitts. But I think from a roster build perspective, it's really going to come down to and this is obviously before this point. This manager has already decided they've got Pitts on their team and they've made that decision. But I think for future decisions or interested of trading for these players, I don't like the 2 elite tight end build if there's only one flex spot. If you've got multiple flex options in your leagues, then going after 2, I've got a league where it's 1-1-1-1, 5 flex, and a super flex. I run 3 tight ends in that league because there's a bit of tight end premium. I've got Kittle, Andrews, and Waller, and I'm starting them every week. But it also makes sense for that lineup. I could play 3 tight ends and still have, assuming I put a quarterback in the super flex spot, I still have 3 other flex spots. So I've still given myself that flexibility. But if your league only has 1 flex spot and you choose to put a tight end in there every week, again, drafting Pitts early is probably making that decision every week to place him in there. You lose that flexibility. Instead of having it as a flex spot, you're basically playing it as a second tight end spot, which is fine. If in a 2 tight end league, if you've got those 2 tight ends, it's amazing. But for everyone else in the league, that flex spot is a flex spot. They don't have that 2 tight end roster build limit where they feel they have to play that second tight end in. If you've got a team like that, you've kind of forced yourself. So to people who have Pitts on their team, I would also say if he's your second tight end and you want to use him as that every week flex and you only have 1 flex spot, I would look to try and trade. If you want to play Pitts every week, trade the established guy. If you've got Kelce, get a haul for him, right? That does make sense too. But I'm against it when you only have the 2 tight end build when you only have 1 flex spot, just because you don't get that flexibility. And I guess that's one thing I want to touch on before getting to injuries is more just general lineup things. And it's how to use the flex spots. And I think one of the things that I see a lot on Twitter, people are kind of getting this a lot, is never play your Thursday night players in the flex. I mean, unless you've got 3 wide receivers playing, 2 of them are in your wide receiver 1-2 spot, and your third is in your flex. You've made that decision. Okay, this week I'm not having that flexibility. I want to get these 3 wide receivers in. Okay, that's fine. But those are the only circumstances where you're playing your Thursday night players in your flex. Usually you want to fill those last. So your Thursday night players, even if you're debating between them in their, let's say this Thursday it would have been Michael Gallup, who unfortunately got hurt in the game, so it wasn't a great play. But if you chose to play Michael Gallup, even though on your team he's probably at very best probably your wide receiver 3, but maybe wide receiver 4 or 5, a player that's going to be a flex consideration, right? Not one of your 2 primary players. Even if he's your flex player in terms of production and value, he should still be in your wide receiver 1 spot because he's playing on Thursday. You get that spot locked. Whereas if you use your Thursday player at your flex spot, suddenly you don't have that flexibility later in the week. And I think where that's going to come in especially important is dealing with injuries, specifically to the Monday night, but also the Sunday night players. So for instance, I guess this was almost a really good example this week, but Josh Jacobs was questionable earlier in the week. He's since had that tag removed. So it looks like Josh Jacobs is going to play, no question. But let's say he went into today, into Sunday, with that questionable tag. What you want to do with Jacobs, even though he might be your RB2, is you want to put him in your flex spot. You want him as late as possible, because if he's in your RB2 and it gets to Monday night and you find out, he's out, you suddenly can only replace him with the running back. And if you don't have a Ravens running back available, or maybe if you have Kenyon Drake as a backup, you're fine there. You just put Kenyon Drake in. But if you don't, then suddenly, you're going to have to go pick up whoever the Raiders' third running back is or some random player, and maybe have to drop Josh Jacobs just to get points in your lineup. And what you might do instead is just take the 0, but that means you're taking a 0 in your lineup. So in order to avoid that, if Josh Jacobs is instead in the flex spot, you don't have to replace him with the running back. You could replace him with a wide receiver. I know one league I have Josh Jacobs in. I placed him in the flex, and my emergency option, this is the thing, you got to make sure you have, in order to take advantage of that flexibility, also make sure you have that player available. But I had Bryan Edwards on that roster. So to me, it was simple as, okay, if Jacobs is not playing, I'll just play Bryan Edwards instead, thinking that they'll probably run less anyway, pass more, so he could get more targets. So kind of natural thing, whereas I'm not playing Bryan Edwards if Josh Jacobs is in the lineup. So I've got that kind of set. So you kind of want to always have like an extra Monday night player playing, just to kind of have them so you can always toss them in the lineup in case someone else is out. But again, the only way that works to where you can replace any player is if the player that's injured, questionable, playing late is in the flex spot, because again, you have less options. If a Thursday night player, you're entering Thursday night, and let's say like Michael Gallup was questionable, and he's questionable, so I'm going to play him, but he should be a flex guy. If you put him in Thursday night, you still have all the players to replace him with. So if you get to Thursday night, he's out, I got to pull him out of the lineup, then you can kind of move around, and you might actually end up replacing with a running back. You might just play one less wide receiver that week, and whatever wide receiver you have in the flex, you move that to your wide receiver spot and then flex a running back. You've got that flexibility early in the week. So where those flex spots really come in handy is the end of the week, the Sunday night and the Monday night games. Because again, at that point, there's only 4 teams. So if you go to a night game with an injury and you've got to replace a player, you've only got 4 teams to choose from, and not all the players might be available. All the fantasy-worthy players on those teams might already be on other rosters. So that's why, again, those flex spots, you leave them for those latest possible players to add that flexibility. So back to, the 2 tight end build, I don't like it if you only have 1 flex spot. As soon as you get 2 flex spots, then I'm fine with it. You say, I'm giving myself less flexibility every week, but I still keep that 1 flex spot in case. Sometimes that's just having that 1 flex spot can be key to that, to the changing in and out players. Anyway, so that's kind of a game theory strategy here on lineup setting, which I think is something to do every week. I always go in when I set my lineups. I make sure, Thursday night players first, get them in the RB1 or wide receiver 1 spots, even though they're not your RB1 or wide receiver 1. And maybe your player that is your first round pick, you might play them in the flex if they play on a Sunday night. I'm trying to think for these games, like if you took, I guess those teams don't really have a good example of first round picks, but Robert Woods, right? Robert Woods, wide receiver. I mean, I've got a couple teams where he is my wide receiver 1. But I've got him in the flex spot because, again, Sunday night game, in case there's an emergency, you tweak something before a game and I have to pull him out, I give myself better options. I could pick from different positions. I don't just have to be stuck at wide receiver. So Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, both this week are better to play in your flex spot than they are in your wide receiver spot. I guess the only exception is, if you have a Marquise Brown, for instance, from Baltimore, then that's the later possible player, so you want them in your flex because it's the Monday night. So always kind of go the top of your lineup. Again, the RB1, wide receiver 1 spot should be the earliest possible players, and the flex spot should be the latest possible players. So that's I'm glad I talked about that week 1, because that's something that's to be done not only to this week but all weeks. And maybe it's a little late on the Thursday night players, but still to get those Sunday night, Monday night players in your flex spots, because that's where it's going to be most useful. Again, obviously there are exceptions. I'm suddenly taking 3 wide receivers and they're all going to play super early. So my flex players playing at 1 o'clock, because everyone, that's fine. But you're making that choice. You've chosen, these are the wide receivers I'm playing, and it is a bit of a risk, but it's also a calculated risk in that regard. So it won't end up always being perfect. And I mean, you might not have any players that you want to play from Sunday, Monday night. That makes it even easier, right? But it's still, if you do have players in those games, it's important to put them at the back end of your lineup in terms of the flex spots, because that's where that flexibility is most useful. So I'm just gonna quickly look for any other questions. I guess actually it's about time the injury reports come out. So I'm going to take a look and see if they've released the active and inactive list for the 1 o'clock game. So obviously we don't get the full 4 o'clock games. So I think it had, well, there are some teams mentioning, so I'm going to stick to mostly just the fantasy relevant players. If there's a really important defensive player that I think needs worth mentioning, I'll mention it too. The Cardinals, I guess the third back, or maybe even the fourth back now, Eno Benjamin is inactive. That seems more a healthy scratch. I haven't really heard of him on the injury reports, but regardless, it's saying more confidence towards Edmonds, Connor. I think Jonathan Ward's their third guy, so maybe that also does speak more to Jonathan Ward being good. Chris Streveler's also inactive. So this maybe speaks to, for this, and this is more going to be like deep superflex leagues. Streveler might not be the backup this year. As much as I liked him as the backup for his running ability, if Kyler Murray ever went out, they could play the similar style. He could produce fantasy points. If he's not going to be the backup, he's probably not worth rostering. Falcons, a couple of young players inactive. Wide receiver rookie Frank Darby, as well as rookie quarterback Felipe Franks. Sorry. I'm not sure how to say that name. But they're going to be inactive, so not the backups yet, but maybe the surprise inactive is Wayne Gallman. I don't know if he's injured or the team just needs to bring him up to speed, but it does look like the Falcons brought him in to be the primary backup. So in that regard, I mean, to me, Gallman, I think has value, but I think will also be the main, again, very clear backup to Mike Davis, which is worth rostering, but again, inactive today. That'll be something to look at. If it takes him a while before he's active, then that might be a problem where they don't trust him enough. But I think for now, this might just be getting him up to speed. You brought him in recently. He was cut by the 49ers at the final 53 cut down. So he's only been with the Falcons for maybe just over a week at this point. So I wouldn't look into it too much. But we get to the Buffalo Bills. And actually, this is where we get the first significant injury update. And it's Zach Moss is inactive. So that says two things. One will be that Devin Singletary, I think, climbs up rankings in terms of becoming a must-play player. Maybe Matt Breida also sees some looks, but yeah, I'm gonna be more aggressive. I was looking through some lineups. I had Singletary. I've got quite a lot of Devin Singletary this year, and I had him in some lineups, but I think now I'm gonna go back and probably put him in every lineup, every league I have him in. I know a lot of my Singletary shares are best ball too, so that's I don't really do anything there. But for the there's a few lineups I know I've got him on the bench, so I'm going to go back in and probably put him into the starting lineup. So I think that'll be that's kind of a big one there. Zach Moss inactive might be so big that I might even type it up here. So in case as we continue, people chime in, can see. Could see that one, because that is a pretty big one, because I'm guessing he was also A, in enough lineups, and B, maybe the managers who have Devin Singletary, they might not necessarily play him. So again, keep that one in mind. We'll keep that there for now. Yeah, and I will. My voice needs not an injured reserve, but needs a little to be missed. Miss some time there. No. Okay, so I guess back to the Bills. The one other player is Star Latuile, so defensive tackle. Now I think Najee Harris is probably going to be in most people's lineup anyway, but this just adds to losing one of your starting defensive tackles. It helped maybe the running a little easier, especially against that rebuilding Steelers offensive line. So maybe a little bit better outlook for Najee Harris. For the Panthers, fantasy relevant inactives, Shi Smith at wide receiver, who's a rookie. Ultimately, it seems like the Panthers are going to be a super condensed offense. One running back, 3 wide receivers are going to get most of the targets, and whoever's the tight end is maybe a 5th player. So yeah, I wouldn't look too much to the depth options in Carolina right now. So looking at Cincinnati's inactives, again, no fantasy relevant player. Their quarterback, Trey Waynes. Maybe it makes it easier for the Vikings, although I also think the Vikings could approach this game and just run it a ton. I know from a DFS perspective, this isn't necessarily a DFS show, but I think Dalvin Cook, I want to get him in as many DFS lineups as possible. I think he might finish the week as the number one overall running back and might have the best chances of doing it. I know Christian McCaffrey is probably right there too, but I really like Cook's chances in this matchup against the Bengals. So that's going to be someone I'm looking to play, especially in DFS, because let's face it, even in face of a bad matchup, you're not benching Dalvin Cook. So now looking at the Lions. So wide receiver Kadarius Hodge, wide receiver Tom Kennedy, and running back Jamar Jefferson are inactive. The fact that Jefferson's inactive tells me they probably have more faith in DeAndre Swift. And I know he was dealing with the groin injury, but I feel like if they were really worried about Swift, they might have made Jefferson active today. So maybe I'm looking too much into it, but I what that tells me is, even though it's a really tough matchup against the 49ers, they're expected to be behind, it tells me Swift's probably going to see enough targets to make him worth playing. So I think I'm starting him in every league I have him in. I don't think there's any spot where I benched Swift, who ended the week not even on the injury report. Like I know like 2 weeks ago there was some real concern that he might not be ready for week 1, but it seems like this week he's been practicing fully and there's no concern now. For the Texans, a player they've recently acquired, or a couple players actually they've acquired this year, Anthony Miller, wide receiver, and Brevin Jordan at tight end are both inactive. Jordan, this would have been his NFL debut as a rookie. For Miller, he was traded for a 7th-round pick from the Bears, and they used a 3rd or 4th-round pick, so definitely kind of a buy low for the Texans, but it doesn't seem like they're even playing it, so maybe he was a buy low for a reason. And not that this, just so everyone knows, this is probably big news anyway that everyone knew, but Desean Watson is inactive. Sounds like the Texans are going to be fully content just making him a healthy scratch all year, so we're constantly going to see him on these week 1 or these every week kind of inactive reports probably as a healthy scratch, but really the big news is if he gets traded or ever finds a way to get back on the field. So now looking at the Colts, Eric Fisher, still recovering from Achilles tear last year, inactive, so he's still going to be a bit. They haven't put him on the injured reserve, so they are probably expecting him to be ready sooner than later, which will help getting that left tackle they want to bring in. They've lost their left tackle from last season to retirement, so right now I guess will be plan B at the left tackle for the Colts. Also, Xavier Rhodes at corner is inactive. Not that Xavier Rhodes isn't good enough to make you not play Metcalf or Lockett, but just all the more reason to now. Better DFS targets. Looking at Jacksonville, tight end Jacob Hollister is inactive. That's actually one of the most key matchups. Is if there is a tight end that emerges in Jacksonville, they're all dirt cheap. So pay attention to that. I'd look at this box score for week 1. Who are the tight ends that got the targets? And maybe Hollister, because he is probably similar to what we was talking about earlier with Wayne Gallman, right? Okay, they're new to the team, so bringing him up to speed before you put him out on the field. But who knows who that tight end is? And maybe none of them emerge. Maybe they're all bad, and it's not an offense you want to invest in a tight end. But if there is someone that does emerge, look for it to kind of emerge quickly, week 1. So look, Jacksonville, again, week 1 box score. Who led the team in tight end targets? Speaking of tight end, Trey McKitty, the rookie tight end for the Chargers, is inactive. It's going to be Parham and Cook as the 1-2. I mean, who knows who's 1, who's the 2? I guess we'll find out this week. I'm hearing a lot that it might actually be Parham instead of Jared Cook. Donald Parham, that is. Now, an inactive for the Chargers, maybe a bit of a surprise, is Joshua Kelly. So I know there was talk of Austin Eckler being questionable. Looks like he's playing, and instead it's actually going to be Kelly that's out. So looking like Kelly's kind of been surpassed by Justin Jackson and the rookie Larry Runtree as the 3rd running back, and he might be the 4th guy now. So so don't play Kelly if he's in your lineups. I know I considered him in one lineup if Austin Eckler was going to be out. I don't think I put him in, but I'll definitely check that before game time, obviously. So looking at the Vikings, now they spent a rookie pick on I think a first-round rookie pick on offensive tackle Christian Darrisaw, who is inactive for this game. Kellen Mond's also inactive, so showing he's not going to be the backup this year, but more in the future plans, or maybe as the year goes on, maybe he gets in there. But Anthony Barr also on defense. So what this means is that I still think the Vikings are going to win, and it'd be a lot of points scored by the Vikings to make it does it all go to Dalvin Cook? Maybe it all does go to Dalvin Cook and no one else is worth playing, but I think at least those other guys are worth playing. But no Anthony Barr. Maybe it's easier to play Mixon and some of the other Bengals receivers in general, but I think Mixon was probably going to be in most lineups anyway. I think even if they're down by a ton, it seems like he's going to be the pass catching back. Now, to the New York Jets, 2 running backs inactive, Josh Adams and LaMichael Pirine. So that those guys really are like the 4th and 5th running back. It seems like it's 3 guys kind of at the top: Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, Michael Carter, with really at this point no idea who's the number 1, who's the 2, who's the 3. How does that all kind of line up? So without knowing that, it's really tough to play any of them. I might take a shot. Panthers not the greatest defense, but they've also have some good pieces, so they definitely improved in that regard. So I think it's definitely a tricky scenario to be in going into week 1 and really playing any of them. But I think we know it's those 3. Like that's their plan, and that's who it's going to be. For the Eagles, Gardner Minshew is actually inactive. Again, that might be something we've talked about, these veterans that join these teams late at the end of training camps or after training camps, and they just need some more time acclimated before they get playing time. So the Steelers now, and this was one question we weren't sure how this was going to be, but Dwayne Haskins is inactive, which tells me that they want Mason Rudolph as the backup still this year. Maybe Haskins eventually takes that over, but again, at this point, I mean, he was there at the end of last season. He's had enough time with training camp and stuff. Preseason, he had opportunities, and it seems like they still for Mason Rudolph. So not much else to talk about there. With the Seahawks, running back Alex Collins is inactive. So it seems like Penny's going to be the main backup. I don't know if that's for the entire season, but at the very least, it looks like Penny is for now the main backup. But I expect Chris Carson's going to get most of that work. Now, this is another big one, probably the biggest one since we talked about Zach Moss. Trey Sermon for the 49ers is also inactive. So that's kind of huge. I was a little low, and anyone who listened to the Full Press Fantasy Pod this week, I was a little lower on Mostert than my co-host Brad was. But knowing this now, where Sermon's out, I think I'd be much more aggressive on playing Mostert. Where did I have him ranked? I think I had him ranked at like RB27, whereas now I might move him into the top 24, but maybe even into the top 20 now, even. So I think that's that might be even huger than the Moss one. But yeah, we've got 2 key running backs inactive already for week 1. So the running back turn going to happen. It's going to start right off the bat. So looking at the Titans, Josh Reynolds, wide receiver Josh Reynolds is inactive. And so also Cameron Baston is inactive for them. So Reynolds kind of almost expected to be the number 3 guy. Not the case anymore, it seems, or at least not for this week. And again, this one is injury related. This I don't think is healthy scratch. He did come in with a questionable tag, and it's looking like they are going to hold him out for the week. So I think looking at it now, I guess Washington's the only team left that we haven't talked about. I'm not really seeing any fantasy relevant players. Kyle Allen's inactive, which I mean that shouldn't be a surprise. I'm honestly surprised they kept him on the team because it seemed like Fitzpatrick he kind of established, and if they weren't going to go with them, if anything, they might look outwards. So I think. I don't think Alex Smith either, but I don't think Kyle Allen is going to be really all that relevant this year, not in my eyes. So I think hopefully some good just injury updates there, which again, usually an hour-long show here. The first half content of that, I guess gearing towards the rest of this will be more sit-start lineup. So feel free to chime in if you do have any questions. Feel free to talk about. So on YouTube, you've got the chat as well. Anyone listening in any other forms, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Senra Says, also at the FPC_fantasy pod. So I think those again, I'll wait around enough to get these sit starts in. I think sorry, I'm just kind of looking through to see if there's also any comments on Twitter asking for any lineup questions. Again, I already gave one earlier talking about Melvin Gordon versus Kyle Pitts. I think it's a good week for Melvin Gordon, so I'm taking Gordon, but I know my co-host on the Full Press Fantasy Pod, Brad Harvin, he's saying Pitts go with that upside, so I think that's a pretty good question. I do wonder if how many people are going to consider flexing Kyle Pitts, and what's the level of player you're choosing to flex them over. I do think it was pretty close, so it wouldn't have been something where there would have been much in the rankings between Pitts and Gordon. So while I'm waiting to hear from other people's questions, I'm going to talk about a couple of my decisions I'm going with, and like going with a certain player over another player, or where I'm stuck. I guess one thing I hinted at was Robert Woods, right? And maybe a tougher matchup against the Bears. So I think in terms of, I'm trying to think, I've got him in, I think, 2 spots. One league, I'm playing him no matter what. Like, my wide receiver options aren't the greatest where I can. There's other league where I can start 2 more wide receivers this week. I think I've already got Chris Godwin in one of the spots, so could flex a wide receiver and play the second one. So really, I've got two spots for 4 players: Robbie Anderson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sterling Shepard, and Robert Woods. I wonder, I'm sure there's a lot of teams kind of built around those players. So this might be something where other people have the similar or maybe even the same type of players questioning. So kind of like, I guess my reasoning on where I'm leaning. So when there's 4 out of 2, like you got 2 spots to start and you need 4 players, what's that gonna look like? Like, what is sorry, how do I say this better? Is it easier to eliminate someone being like they're the clear 4th, or is it easier to name someone as, okay, this is the player I must start? And I think based on the quarterback play, I would say in this instance it's easier to eliminate, and that's Sterling Shepard. Although I guess Robbie Anderson has Sam Darnold, so is it that much better than what Sterling Shepard has with Daniel Jones? I don't know, maybe. But I think, as much as I criticize Ben Roethlisberger, I think him and certainly Matt Stafford are better. So when it comes to quarterback play, you're definitely getting the best quarterback play out of Woods and Juju, but they're also, they've got some difficult defenses to go up against. Whereas, like, if anyone who listened to Full Press coverage NFL kickoff this morning, Braden Holochek mentioned that the Jets, he thinks the Jets have maybe the worst cornerback room in the NFL. So I think it's a great matchup for Robbie Anderson, who should see a ton of targets no matter what. And I like, in theory, all 4 of those players could have the most targets really on any given week, but also for the course of the entire season. If Juju led the Steelers in targets, we wouldn't be totally shocked by that. Same with Sterling Shepard. With Woods and Anderson, I might almost even expect it with those 2. So a lot of targets to go around, but I think, like, looking strictly at cornerback matchups, I think Robbie Anderson probably has the best. Now, is Juju going to see any of Tre'Davious White against the Bills? Maybe if he's in the slot, maybe he doesn't, so he still gets a good matchup there too. The Bears releasing Kyle Fuller, I don't know if they've properly replaced him, so maybe Woods gets good matchup regardless. Who's the Broncos slot corner? Because they've also lost a piece in the secondary. So in theory, all these receivers have good matchups. So I guess what's being really tricky about it, again, the quarterbacks would say lean Juju, Woods, and then kind of between Robbie Anderson and Sterling Shepard. I feel like I trust the Panthers offense more, and that's why I'd go Anderson. So I think for me in that case, with those four, Anderson, Juju, Sterling Shepard, Robert Woods, I think Sterling Shepard to me is the most obvious bench. Now, what I have to do is I have to pick two of these guys. So it does make it kind of a 2 of 3 now. I've got to pick two of either Anderson, Juju, and Robert Woods. And I think, again, if I went with the quarterback play, Robbie Anderson would be the obvious bench. But he also led the team in targets last year, and he's playing with a quarterback he's already played with. So I do expect Darnold's going to rely on Anderson more this week. So the more I see it, the more Anderson's the one I really want to play more than anyone. So then it really comes down to Juju and Robert Woods. So again, that's kind of how, when you have multiple players to choose from in lineup matchups, one of the things I like to do is either eliminate off the bottom or off the top. In this case, both. So that it's between Robert Woods and Juju Smith-Schuster. I have Robert Woods ranked higher. Again, I'm less impressed with the Bears corners than maybe the Bills secondary overall. So I think that's why I'm leaning Robert Woods. I like Stafford, I think, at this point of his career more than Ben Roethlisberger. So in this case, I'm going to bench Juju, bench Sterling Shepard in favor of starting Robbie Anderson and starting Robert Woods. Robbie and Robert, right? Now, comment here. So Chris Blackie asking, what's going on, Kyle? I know Blackie does play some fantasy. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he won the Full Press Radio Live last year, the league. So a bunch of us fantasy people losing to the hockey guy really showed us, showed how important hockey is. so good on that, Blackie. If I remember that correctly, and if I'm misattributing to that, well, I'm sorry I gave you a championship you didn't get, but I feel like that was the case. Anyway, good to see you, Blackie, asking what's going on, Kyle, and I'm happy where the NFL's here. It's talking fantasy football, talking start sits for a matchup that's coming. For the 1 o'clock games are within an hour now, so already kind of went through the injury reports. I guess the big news. Again, I'll repeat again, Zach Moss, Bills running back, and Trey Sermon, 49ers running back, both out for this week 1 contest. So suddenly it raises Singletary up rankings a ton, I think. And Mostert also goes up. It's a great matchup against the Lions. I would say you could argue both are top 24 options. I know there was a couple leagues where I was debating Singletary or another player. Like talked about the Jets, I was debating Singletary or Michael Carter. Another one, Singletary or James Conner. And I think in both those instances, I might have actually gone with the other player. But now that we know that, again, Zach Moss is out, I think Devin Singletary to me is the play in both those instances. So I'm going to go with Singletary over Michael Carter, Singletary over James Conner. Trying to think back any other Singletary decisions. I'm gonna go back through my lineup because there's maybe some leagues where I was like, okay, I'm not going to play Singletary this week. I'm not going to worry about it, but I might end up making myself some more questions here. So usually for these shows, I go on until about 12:30. So leave people about half hour after the show to kind of take that advice and do whatever they will with that, but also time to set lineups and set my own lineups. Again, I think there's going to be a couple extra lineups I put Singletary in. An interesting one I have for tonight, and this is, again, I wouldn't be able to do this if I played Montgomery in his running back spot, even though I think on this team, like, he was the second running back I drafted. So in theory, he's my RB2 on my team. But what I'm thinking is in this league, I put him as the flex spot because now I suddenly actually can decide between him and Cooper Kupp. Part of me is thinking, actually, as much as I like running backs, and in this particular league, there's an extra half point for first down, which as long as, if Montgomery's not being productive against the Rams, it won't matter. But if he gets enough opportunity and productive, it might tilt that towards him. But I am seriously considering playing Cooper Kupp over him, just thinking the Rams offense might have more points available to them as opposed to Montgomery. But the other reason that this is important is that I can make that decision Sunday night because I've got I'm not putting Montgomery in the RB2 spot and having to make that decision now. I'm putting Montgomery in the flex spot and giving myself as long as possible to make that decision. So this is another example of why that put your late players in the flex spot is A, you've got the flexibility, but B, you can gather more information. You can see how your 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock players have done. The other team might already be done And you know, okay, oh, I need 10 points to catch them, or I need 25 points to catch them. If it's 10 points to catch them, I'm probably going with Montgomery, thinking he's probably safer to get those 10 points than Kupp. But if I really need like that big score, multi-touchdowns, I'm probably going to go with Cooper Kupp then. So those type of factors could come in. So in that particular league, I'm going to wait until probably just before kickoff Sunday night to make that decision, or at the very least once the 4 o'clock Eastern games are done, and I know kind of the results. I know what I need points wise. If it's just a few, the running back safer floor. If it's quite a lot, you probably want the ceiling of Cooper Kupp. So like deciding between players like that, sometimes if you could make it as late as possible, that could add information. You know how many points you'll need to score from that position, whether it's one player or the other. I know Austin Eckler was questionable, with him not being on the inactive list. He's going to play. I know there was a couple leagues I had him in where I had set up, and something I did yesterday was kind of go through, okay, what are the leagues that I have Eckler in, wrote them down, and also what are the players I'm going to put in? I don't want to have to necessarily, if I needed to do that this morning, I didn't want to be like necessarily running through the whole roster. I did that yesterday to kind of aid, so I can do this show and not have to stress about my lineups after. But so what I've got is, if Eckler was out in one league, I was going to replace him for James Conner. In another league, it was Nyheim Hines. So it's funny, in one league, it's the total opposite. Instead of the pass catching back like Eckler, I'm going with the touchdown upside of Conner. The other league, it was, okay, give me the pass catchers. In terms of Hines, I think running backs, I think it's something like 2 points per reception in that league. Not just for running backs, for all positions, but it definitely emphasis on the pass catcher. So I'd want a pass catcher like Eckler or like Hines to replace Eckler. Wouldn't want to necessarily, like in that league, I wouldn't, if I had Conner, which I might actually. I have Conner in a ton of leagues, but if I did, that would have been less likely to want to do that. But it seems like in both instances, I'm just going to play Eckler, thinking that the Washington defense is tough, but that might end up being a good matchup for Eckler. A lot of dump offs if the pass rush is too strong. So I do like Eckler this week against Washington. And I mean, to me, a lot of leagues, he's either a first or second round pick. One of the leagues I have him in, I guess, is a dynasty league. So that I was able to get him a little cheaper a couple years ago. But for the most part, he's a first or second round pick. If he's playing, you're playing him, right? Again, dealing with an injury, but it seems like most of this week, he was fine, and the more extra precaution than anything. He might not be 100%, but he seems like he's close to it. So if with Eckler in, he's going to be in all the lineups on the teams I have him in. So yeah, stick on for about another 15 minutes or so. Again, for any sit-start questions for fantasy football for week 1, you can put them here on the YouTube comments, or tag me on Twitter at Senra Says, or at the Full Press Coverage Fantasy Pod account at FPC_Fantasy Pod. Now, I guess with Sermon out, do I play Jermichael Hasty in any lineups? I don't think this is the greatest Hasty week. I think like where Jermichael Hasty specifically for the 49ers has the most value is as a pass catcher. So like in this game where the Lions are I think the heaviest underdog this week. I'm just going to check to make sure. Last time I checked the spreads, they had, the Buccaneers were 7.5 point favorites, the 49ers are 7.5 point favorites, and the Rams were 7.5 point favorites. So among what expect to be the biggest blowout, obviously that didn't hold true for the Bucs Cowboys game. The Lions also don't have Dak Prescott, who might be a top 5 quarterback on their team. So probably going to keep this lower scoring, which I think hurts Hasty. Is where you'd want Hasty is, again, games where the 49ers might not even be favored, but are certainly where the spread's closer, but are the underdogs where they're, the other team's expected to score a lot of points and they're going to have to pass more. That's where I'd want Hasty more. So even with Sermon out, as adamant a Jermichael Hasty truther I am, I don't think I'm starting him in any leagues this week. Thinking that, I mean, this is a great opportunity for Mostert. I don't have him in any leagues. Not someone I want. I did not like his draft price at all. He's a great start to have for this week, and suddenly in DFS consideration as well. So I know this week, especially on DraftKings DFS, James Robb being so cheap kind of makes that the free square for running back, but Mostert might also come in value. I mean, if you play both of them, you can overload with elite players at every other position. So So I think like I'm just looking around at a couple of comments just on Twitter or in DM chats and stuff, and people seem surprised about the Sermon thing. Like, this kind of came out of nowhere. So not injury related. I do. Uh, Actually, funny enough, I just saw a tweet pass. Someone's asking if they should add Jermichael Hasty to dropping Ty Johnson to add Hasty. I don't. I'm as big a Hasty truther as anybody, and I don't think I would do that. Just because, again, we talked about that New York Jets ambiguous backfield. Ty Johnson could be the lead back there, and I don't think Hasty's ever going to be the lead back unless there's a ton of injuries. Now, if there's also a ton of injuries at the Jets, then it just means more work for Johnson. So I don't think I would do that at this point. I think I would keep Johnson. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong on that. But yeah, I'm maybe the biggest hasty truther that I know. I mean, most people didn't predict him to make this roster even, and I've kind of done it 2 years in a row where I think, he seems like he's the best pass catcher. So not dropping Ty Johnson. I'm just kind of responding to that. Sorry, this is great radio. Just the chance that maybe Ty Johnson's the lead back, I think, is intriguing enough that I wouldn't go and, so pick up, in that question, I can transition to pick up Hasty if it's at the right price. And like, you're not, if you're dropping some random wide receiver for Hasty, I'm usually going to be pretty fine with that. But again, it's the fact that someone asked about dropping a potential lead back on a team, even if it is a giant committee. Really, the 49ers are going to be the same committee anyway. So that maybe the unknown of the Jets, we don't know for sure that's what they're going to do. It seems like it probably is, but I would take I think I'd still hang on to Ty Johnson instead of taking the shot on Hasty. Again, Hasty might be a better play this week than Johnson. I don't know that Johnson was necessarily in that lineup. So I think, Hasty's probably is the better play, but I don't know that he's a good enough play that I would just it'd have to be, very clearly, I'm missing a spot in my lineup. I really need that one player that I don't know who I'm going to play. I wouldn't play Hasty over guys that are established, were already planned to be starters every week or close to every week, and we're already planning to play them. I wouldn't be benching Hasty for those guys. I'd be, if you were scrambling for someone and maybe we're playing someone you didn't like already, then that's be somewhat okay. Take Hasty and put them in. Also, apparently, so just quickly scanning Twitter for anything I could find news-wise, beat reporters. Apparently, Odell Beckham will be a game-time decision today. He's another player, like, I probably want to put Beckham in my flex spot if I can, unless I had something or Monday Night Players. But if I didn't, because here's the thing, like, even if you have Sunday and Monday Night Players, let's say you have Beckham and Marquise Brown on the same team. I'm still putting Brown in the flex, even though Beckham's the one that's questionable. And what happens is when it gets to close to 4 o'clock, or usually those injury reports for the 4 o'clock games are out by 3:30 p.m. Eastern. So let's say around 3:30 when you go to check your lineup, is like at that point you still have that flexibility where you can decide, okay, at this point Beckham's out and I want to replace him for a running back. Then you could move Brown into the wide receiver spot and flex that running back. Whereas, like, if you did the opposite, where, okay, Beckham's in and you forget to leave him in, and suddenly you need that flex spot for Brown. So, like, that's one of those where, injured players especially is why you use those flex spots. But again, the late as player as possible, because, Brown, his game being Monday night, his spot won't lock at the time that we'll find out if Beckham's in or not. So you can move him easily into that wide receiver spot if you want to replace Beckham with a running back. Or if you want to replace Beckham with a wide receiver, he's already in that wide receiver spot. It's easy. And you still have that flexibility on the Monday night with the player there. So, so that's kind of how I'd approach Beckham. it's such a great matchup against the Chiefs, thinking the volume should be there. This should be a heavy volume pass game for the Browns, assuming they're going to be behind and needing to catch up. Heck, if they take a big lead, then I don't know. I'm having a hard time seeing that path to playing. My mistake. What I meant to say was the opposite of not playing him, right? Like if Beckham's active, I just feel like he's going to get the targets. Like if they're going to play him, even if he's not 100%, they clearly want him in there for a reason. And maybe it is just to use as a decoy, and he doesn't see any targets at all, but he's just drawing coverage. But like Stefanski doesn't seem like he would do it. All right, so 10 minutes left, and I do actually have a question here. Now, unfortunately, they said more, which at this point could mean 4 or 5 different players, maybe more. So I just asked them which more that is. But starting the flex, Cortland Sutton, Laviska Shenault, or more. I'm leaning Shenault, but I guess it depends on who that more is. I mean, if it's DJ Moore, I think it's DJ Moore pretty easily. And also, maybe knowing if it's PPR or not. But okay, so we'll leave Moore out of it because I don't know which one. So looking just at Sutton and Shenault, both teams are favored. Actually, both teams are favored on the road, funny enough. So, either game script could go where the running backs are heavily used if those teams get up early. Actually, I think they're both 3.5 point favorites on the road. So it's tough to know who's even the heavier favorite really in terms of who's going to score more points, because that's kind of where the team you'd want to track to. I'm thinking just strictly matchups. The Houston defense is so bad, especially in the secondary, that there's no wide receiver I'm worried about any of their matchups, whereas the Giants actually have some pretty good corners. Especially if Jerry Jeudy's in the slot, I would expect, unless Bradbury's going to shadow him in the slot, and I don't think they would do that, I would see Bradbury actually shadowing Cortland Sutton, and that could be pretty bad for Sutton. So I'm thinking right off the bat, I would go Shenault over Sutton. And okay, so it's a full point PPR, and it's Elijah Moore. So yeah. That's tricky. Both young players. Panthers, especially with Jamison Crowder out, it looks like Elijah Moore could be the slot receiver for them. So he could be very useful. It seems like that's also where Chenault's going to be. Looking at implied team totals, that might end up being the difference here. So implied team totals, the Jags have 23.75. The Jets are actually the underdogs, 25.25. You like them as underdogs because that means more pass attempts. But in terms of total points, yeah, that one's tricky. I'm leaning Shenault. I think I would play Shenault over Elijah Moore. Yeah, so this is Ricky Keeler asking me this. Rickinator 555. Actually, he mentioned something. So he figured with Bradbury on him, that's a bad matchup. He said he's probably playing Shenault. It's against Houston. Want to wait and see how much Moore is going to get the ball. I think if you've got not so great options, Elijah Moore is a fine play this week. It did kind of risk it and see. But with Shenault, I think I would go with Shenault, just thinking that it's two rookie quarterbacks. One's playing against a Panthers team that's ascending, and the other one's playing against a Texans team that who knows what direction they're going in. So I think just based on the defense they're playing, I think Chenault's the answer. The other one is Jacobs or Devin Singletary at RB2. I might actually go Singletary there. Just it's such a tough matchup for Jacobs. And the one worry that's kind of been all season is, like all off season, between Moss and Singletary. It's like, oh, you'd love to get one, but the other one being there, it just kind of prevents it. And then Josh Allen also running in some touchdown hurts it too. Because Singletary in this case is kind of game script proof. Because like if okay, let's say the Steelers, maybe what we would think is unexpectedly get the lead and are up big, and the Bills are having to pass a ton to catch up. Singletary's going to be involved in the passing game enough. Although let's be honest, the way the Bills were last year, they'd pass a ton even when they were up. So the pass catching back there, he might be second or third, maybe fourth on the team in targets at worst. I think is kind of safe to bet that. So yeah, whereas Jacobs, the lack of I think it's tough ground matchups either way, but Singletary gives you the pass catching, whereas Jacobs really doesn't. They brought in Kenyon Drake. Is that for Drake's role to be the pass catcher? Maybe they give it more to Jacobs, but yeah. So yeah, I think it's coming down to that, is that give me the guy with the pass catching role and the team that's expected to score more points, as opposed to like a early down grinder like Jacobs, who has been fantastic the last few years for fantasy, but with the hurt, like the offensive line being the worst it's ever been, at least the worst he's ever run behind. So yeah, so I'm thinking I'm going to go Singletary ahead of Jacobs this week. So definitely, I'm telling that to Keeler to do that. I'm trying to think. I know I have Jacobs in one league. I think I actually have Moss in that league, not Singletary. So I can't make that decision myself, but I would if I had Singletary in that league instead of Moss. I'd be playing Singletary over Jacobs. Could also play both. Like I think in that league, my wide receivers aren't strong enough that I could just flex two running backs. Thinking I've got Eckler and maybe I don't actually. I may Nyheim Hines. I think that's who I've got in the first two running back spots. So that really could have come down to double flexing two running backs there. But yeah, in my case where I've got Jacobs, I've got Zach Moss. So it's kind of obviously I'm not going to play the injured guy. So yeah, so that might be a hot take, but going Singletary, I'm going to be more aggressive with Singletary now, knowing that if things get out of hand with the Steelers, at least he's a pass catcher. Knowing how much they love to throw the ball, that should be volume regardless of how the game goes. And we're kind of approaching, we're in the final 5 minutes here. I guess I'll go with the CFL reference and say 3-minute warning, not 2-minute warning. I was watching a lot of CFL yesterday, so clearly I'm in that. That's because I guess by this time of year, normally the CFL has started where there's 2 months worth, maybe even 3 months worth of games. So I'm so used to hearing 3-minute warning. Or, got a punt on third down. It's third down, got a punt. But now it's only been 5 weeks, so I'm maybe less used to it, so it'll be easier to transition back to the NFL for that. But yeah, so if there are any final questions, this is the time for it, whether it's on Twitter or here on the YouTube channel. Now, there will be no show next week. I'm going to be out of town and doing a lot of driving, so unavailable to make it. But starting week 3, I'm going to, try and make this a consistent every week thing, near to the end of the season. So appreciate everyone who chimes in, watches, listens. Appreciate all the support, not just for this show, but everything Full Press Coverage, which you can find on Twitter at FP_coverage. All the you can also follow the Full Press NFL account at Full Press NFL, and that gives you all the NFL content specifically from Full Press Coverage. Because we also have a lot of good hockey content. Again, Blackie's here, Big Bad Bruins podcast co-host, and some other great Full Press Coverage content stuff. So again, check all that out. For myself personally, I'm on Twitter at Senra Says. You can also follow the Full Press Coverage Fantasy Pod at FPC_Fantasy Pod. And so the final minutes, any last minute comments. Once again, those Thursday night players, never flex them, unless like your most of your lineups in Thursday night, like you're totally stacking a matchup. But like if you've got wide receiver or running back options open, don't play those Thursday night running backs or wide receivers in the flex. Play them in those RB1, wide receiver 1 spots. Because really, like where the players in the lineup isn't going to change the points. But one of the things that factors in is when they're played, the timing, giving yourself the flexibility with the flex spots at the end. All that's incredibly important. And hopefully I've helped everyone kind of understand that. And so 12:30 now. We got a half hour before kickoff, so let people get to those lineups. Once again, the big news, Zach Moss out for the Bills and Trey Sermon out for the 49ers. So make sure you get those running backs out of your lineup. Especially Devin Singletary, I think, is maybe the biggest beneficiary of that, where I'm going to be really aggressive putting him in lineups. I know one question asked Singletary or Josh Jacobs, and for this week I'm going to go with Singletary because of the tough matchup, and sometimes you got to make tough calls like that in fantasy. I'm here to help with that as best I can. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was FPC Fantasy